This is 12 miles south of Johnson City, not far from the Tennessee-North Carolina state line. The interstate completely washed out there. It's not far from the hospital in Irwin, Tennessee either, where patients had to be rescued from the roof. Over 40 patients and employees there. The North Carolina Department of Transportation, again, says all roads in western North Carolina should be considered closed.
Welcome to the Pathfinder Podcast, where we examine the paths of those that have gone before us and use this knowledge to smooth the process of forging our own path. This is Salty the Sun Devil coming to you from Mi Casa in Phoenix, Arizona. It's been a minute, and I'm going to explain where I've been. As I mentioned about 3 weeks ago, I flew out to Fort Bragg. Fort Liberty, to help someone accomplish a permanent change of station and move cross-country. I must say the gods smiled upon me as we got out of town just ahead of Hurricane Helene. That didn't make our trip all that easy. This is the second time I've done a military move during a hurricane, and for some reason I am lucky enough to have avoided tragedy in both instances. First time was when I was joining the military as a second lieutenant and moving down to Fort Benning, Georgia, and the hurricane avoided me by going back out to sea while I was driving south and then coming back into land in the north. You can see video and photos that accompany the audio of this podcast on our YouTube channel at Pathfinder. That's Tango Foxtrot Pathfinder on the YouTube. This time around, we packed up our stuff in a moving van, put the car on a trailer, and headed out the gate, and saw two C-130s taking off from the base, which was kind of neat and maybe a little bit of a historical omen, leaving the home of the airborne. But turns out those aircraft were leaving because Hurricane Helene was inbound. So, as we were heading west, the rain started catching us. We had put our route in Google Maps, and on the way, the time to our destination getting longer and longer, which made no sense. You'll notice in the intro of this podcast, the news report that states that the highway was washed out, so we had to take the back roads to get to our hotel. There was a good lesson learned here. If you're going to make a reservation for a hotel, it might be a good idea to make sure you can make it there. We ended up making it to Lebanon, Tennessee around 2 in the morning. Upon waking up in the morning, we noticed Lebanon, Tennessee is a beautiful little town with some really nice restaurants and caught some breakfast. The ironic thing was, in the center of town, there's a Confederate War Memorial. The ironic thing is that the base Fort Bragg was changed due to the name of the base being named after General Braxton Bragg. And I promise I'll do a historical background on that name change at a later date. But the fact that Lebanon, Tennessee had a monument that says right on it Confederate War Memorial kind of blew my mind, especially since Tennessee is pretty far north. One thing I learned in the midst of this tragedy was that the veterans pulled together once again to save the day for many people. The government couldn't get their act together quick enough, so the veterans banded together and many organizations figured out how to recruit helicopter pilots and helicopters and raise funds for fuel to rescue people from the danger zones. In addition to that, they flew provisions into people who were going to stay put where they were at and wait for government entities like FEMA to reach them. I want to give a special shout out to some veterans organizations and individuals who got involved quickly. First, Save Our Allies. I've mentioned Save Our Allies in the past and donated to their cause when getting American citizens and green card holders out of Afghanistan as it fell. Save Our Allies has a robust organization and a strong backbone for doing relief work. As I said in my Memorial Day message, when I mentioned charity organizations, make sure you do your research. I'm just telling you what I've done in the past with Save Our Allies. Additionally, there were individuals like Cletus McFarland who took his brand new helicopter, flew out and rescued people and brought provisions to people who were staying in their homes. I'd also like to acknowledge individuals like Preston Stewart, who set up a GoFundMe to raise relief money for Hurricane Helene relief. Preston is a West Point graduate and has been covering the war in Ukraine and came home and did not hesitate to get involved. He set up an individual donor account through GoFundMe that raises money for the American Red Cross in support of Hurricane Helene. I'll put links to these individuals and their organizations in the show notes. So looking at the aftermath of Hurricane Helene, what can we learn from it? Well, first of all, we can see that Uncle Salty's one lucky SOB. Looking at this picture of the map of Hurricane Charley, which is the one I went through when I was a second lieutenant, you can see how it skipped right across South Carolina, went back out to sea, and then hit again up near Virginia, which is where I came from. When a hurricane happens, one of the first things that happens is the power goes out. Next, buildings get damaged. There's flying glass, flying metal, flying pieces of wood. Then there's flooding from rain and from the sea surges. And then in the aftermath, the buildings that have been flooded have mold and they basically have to be torn down. So looking at all those outcomes, what can we do to try and mitigate those things? First of all, make sure you have chronic medications that you've been prescribed and some preventative medication, such as antibiotics or anything to treat a wound. One of the things I noticed in the reports coming out of Hurricane Helene was that there were people who had gone down to their last bit of insulin. They were running out of oxygen for their oxygen bottles, and any chronic medications for things like diabetes that could actually put you in a situation where you might die can be preventable if you stock up on those things. The next thing to look at is how you're going to treat any type of wound or injury. You have to have a first aid kit. Build a robust first aid kit for your home and have at least 2 mobile first aid kits. I keep first aid kits in my car, and mine are very robust, basically because of my training. I have tourniquets, I have chest seals, any type of wound care, gauze, things like that. After you've treated somebody who's injured or you're self-treated, the next thing you need to be concerned about is water. It's one of the next things that can cause you to die, lack of potable water. You have a way to make potable water, either through filtration, through boiling, iodine tablets. Without water, you're going to die within a few days. Exposure has to be your next concern. I've given out emergency blankets almost every year at Christmas to people. They're the ones that look like tinfoil. You see them sometimes at the end of a marathon race. They'll wrap a runner in them. Those cost a few dollars on Amazon, and there's nothing preventing you from getting them. They take up about a 3-inch space. Next, dealing with exposure is some type of shelter. Do you have tarpaulin to repair a damaged roof, or do you have a tent that you could set up on some type of dry ground? How are you going to keep yourself warm or cool in some instances? You can purchase a solar generator for very little money that will run a fan to keep you cool or power a heater to keep you warm. Unfortunately, if there's flooding, that battery's probably going to be damaged. There's other forms of fuel though, about propane tanks, wood, charcoal. You have a 5-gallon can of gasoline. There are additives you can put in gasoline that'll make it hold for a long time. After taking care of these basic necessities, you have to find a way to communicate with the outside world. Cell phone towers are going to be down immediately. In the case of Hurricane Helene, Elon Musk provided Starlink for people, which was amazing. That's not always going to be the case. I recently purchased 2 Baofeng. These are portable ham radios that do require a license. However, in an emergency, you can transmit and receive over them without having any legal action. How many flashlights do you have? Are they in good working order? Do you have backup batteries for them? Next, you need to consider food. It seems like it would be further up on the list, but actually you can go many days without food. So do you have any dehydrated food that'll keep for a long time? Most dehydrated foods will last about 25 years. Those are just some good ideas to prepare for an emergency. There's a website called ready.gov/kit that provides an extensive list of items that are useful and very much needed in the case of an emergency like a hurricane. Once we got moving again, we saw the 101st Airborne just hopped over from close by Kentucky to help out. It was a great sight to see. We made it to St. Louis, then pressed onward west towards our home, crossing the bridge at St. Louis. Late into the night, we came upon Buc-ee's. It was my first time visiting Buc-ee's, and it was quite a sight to see. There was hardly anybody there because it was almost 1 in the morning, but it's a 24-hour operation. We got to check out everything they had for sale, and I was tempted to load up a barbecue. There were over 100 gas pumps, and they even had pumps for the DEF, which is a diesel fuel additive, normally sold in gallon buckets. We saw the famous statue of Buc-ee, grabbed some Sammies, and got back out on the road. Mike Tyson is famously quoted as saying, "Everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth." In my previous episode, I mentioned my plan was to drive across country and pontificate on some subjects along the way. One of the subjects I was going to cover was curiosity and how it links to critical thinking. The other one I wanted to talk about was fear, how you overcome fear, and how in the military you do it through repetition and stress inoculation. I'll cover those at a future date, but I wanted to give you a primer on it. We ended up getting a hotel in Blue Springs, Missouri, and on the morning after, we took a tour of Van Duit, which is a Sprinter van conversion company, and we got a tour of their factory, which is amazing. I'm looking at those vans as a future project. After the factory tour, we decided to press on. We moved on through Amarillo, Texas, saw a few of the sites on the way, made it to Albuquerque, New Mexico, and decided to rest for the night in Tucumcari, New Mexico. Our plan to do sightseeing kind of went out the window due to the hurricane and the events surrounding it, so we decided to press on all the way to Phoenix. It was great to see the scenery as we approached Phoenix and moved on into the Tempe ASU campus. It was great to be back in the Valley of the Sun, seeing all the sights and sounds I'm familiar with. Unfortunately, the heat hasn't relented quite yet. Bonus we got was to get back in town just in time to attend 2 nail-biting games, with the Sun Devil football team defeating the Utah Utes 27-19, and Sun Devil hockey team sent the University of Michigan hockey team home with a 4-3 defeat and a shootout victory for ASU. Watching the Sun Devils hockey team do their patented victory circle and smash into the student section boards is always inspiring. After hearing today's episode, I think you'll probably have picked up some good preparation and planning tips in the face of disaster or an emergency. Veterans band together in the face of danger, and I think we can all be inspired and work a little harder and push ourselves a little more to be that person that can be counted on. And remember what Iron Mike Tyson said, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. If you're listening to the audio version of this podcast, please go over to the YouTube channel at TF Pathfinder. That's Tango Foxtrot Pathfinder on the YouTube, and you'll see incredible video and imagery. If you learned something that's useful in forging your own path, reach out to us at our email at pathfinderpodcast@fastmail.com. Please like and subscribe to Pathfinder Podcast and share the show with all those you feel might benefit from the Pathfinder stories. This is Salty Sun Devil coming to you from Mikasa in beautiful Phoenix, Arizona. Now go find your path.